Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder if music could paint pictures in your mind, not just in your imagination, but as a real sensory experience? Well, this new study dives deep into just that, exploring a fascinating condition called chromaesthesia, which is essentially sound. Color, synesthesia. What if hearing a song didn't just trigger emotions, but also a whole world of colors, textures, and even smells? This research takes us beyond the simple idea of sound having an associated color. It suggests that for some people, listening to music can create a rich, multi-sensory and embodied experience, a whole world unfolding in their minds, shaped by memory and even dialogue. So, what exactly is synesthesia? Think of it like this. Imagine seeing the letter A and automatically, without even trying, seeing it as blue or red. That is a common form of synesthesia. In this case, we're talking about chromaesthesia, where sounds create colors. Usually, scientists have studied this by looking for stable, one-to-one pairings. If you hear a certain note, you always see the same color. But this study asks, what if it is more complex? What if these experiences aren't always stable, and what if they involve more than just color? The researchers point out a potential problem with how synesthesia is often studied. For a long time, the gold standard for identifying synesthesia has been temporal consistency. This means that if you associate a sound with a color, you should do so consistently every time you hear it, even after breaks. But what if someone's synesthetic experience changes or is more fluid? The researchers suggest that these tests might miss out on some genuinely rich synesthetic experiences because they're too rigid. Imagine expecting every time you hear a flute, it is always bright yellow, but for some, it might be a slightly different shade of yellow depending on the mood of the music, or even have a texture. This study wanted to explore those more complex, unstable, and multisensory experiences. So, how did they investigate this? They decided to do a deep dive, a qualitative case study. This means they focused on one person or a small group and really explored their experience in detail, rather than trying to get statistics from a huge number of people. They interviewed one participant, let's call her A, who experiences chromaesthesia. What is really interesting is that the interviewer Q also had chromaesthesia. This insider perspective they believed would help build rapport and allow them to dig into the subtle details of A's experience. They even included Q's own reports during the dialogue, making the process a shared exploration. They chose a specific piece of music, Claude Debussy's Clair de Lune, a beautiful and evocative piano piece, to be the stimulus. The interview itself was semi-structured. This means they had a guide with questions, but they let the conversation flow naturally. They listened to Clair de Lune together, pausing and replaying parts as needed, and asked about what it was experiencing. They focused on what sensory images came up, how they were connected, and how they formed a complete experience for her. They weren't just asking what color do you see, they asked about shapes, movement, temperature, smell, taste, bodily sensations, and emotions. And what they found was fascinating. A's experiences weren't just simple sound-color pairings. When listening to Clair de Lune, she reported a whole range of sensations. For example, certain melodies brought up white light, sometimes shaped like a circle or a line, and these lights would move, often falling from top to bottom. But it didn't stop there. She also reported sensations like warmth, the smell of powdery incense, and even a bittersweet taste. This wasn't just visual, it was a full sensory experience. This leads to one of their key findings. These weren't isolated sensations. They were experienced as coherent multisensory images. For instance, a high-pitched melody wasn't just a color, it might be a white circular light falling from the top of a space. It was a complete picture, a motif. The interviewer, Q, also reported vivid images, like petals and stars, which were described with specific colors, movements, and locations. They even reported the phrase like something oriental, which brought together visual, spatial, olfactory, and emotional elements. This shows that for synesthetes, these concurrents are often integrated wholes, not just a list of sensations. Even more intriguing, sometimes these synesthetic experiences could trigger further synesthetic experiences. They called these second-order concurrents. For example, if a sound evoked a feeling of bitterness, that bitterness itself could then elicit a visual sensation, like a jagged taste or a specific color associated with bitterness. It is like a cascade of connected sensory experiences. These experiences also synchronize with the music in various ways. Some concurrents matched individual notes, like a light falling with a specific piano chord. Others tracked the flow of the music like an arpeggio unfolding as a flickering line, and some synchronized over longer musical passages, creating a stable background, like a consistent dark blue space. This synchronization across different temporal scales highlights how deeply these sensory experiences are tied to the music. A striking part of their findings was the concept of a concurrent space. This is like a background or a stage where the synesthetic experiences would play out. For this space often felt like a cube, at times transforming into a flat plane. Q also described a dark blue, expansive space like a deep night sky, more than just a visual backdrop. This space also evoked a sense of presence, a feeling of being located or oriented within it. It was as if their body was positioned within this imagined sensory world. The concurrent space wasn't static. It described it changing shape, from cubic to planar, and back again, linking these transformations to different parts of the music. This suggests that the overall structure and mood of the music could literally reshape the internal sensory world of the listener. This sense of presence was crucial. It wasn't just observing a scene, it was feeling in it. For example, when the space felt expansive and three-dimensional, it felt strongly inside it. But when it became a plane, her experience shifted to more of an outside looking through a window, feeling this connection to bodily self. Location and orientation is a key aspect of why they call it embodied. And it wasn't just sensory. Emotional images were also part of the experience. Loneliness, surprise, disgust, enchantment, romance, these emotions were interwoven with the colors, shapes, and other sensations. This highlights that for synesthetes, the experience of music is deeply emotional and sensory at the same time. These sensory and emotional images also had reported effects on bodily sensations. Sensations like stirs the chest or feelings linked to temperature and humidity were directly connected to the concurrence. This strengthens the idea that synesthesia isn't just a detached mental phenomenon. It is something that can be felt in the body. A particularly interesting concept they introduced is counterfactual richness. This refers to the feeling that within the experience there are possibilities for bodily action, even if you are not actually moving. For example, describing a space with air and depth that keeps extending further ahead implies that if you were to move, you'd discover more. Imagine feeling like you could ride on those petals or sway with them. These aren't just passive sights, they're experiences with potential for movement. This again points to a deeply embodied, active relationship with the perceived sensory world. As you might expect, there were individual differences. A's descriptions often focused on geometric and optical elements, while Q's included more figurative and cross-modal elements like flowers and scents. This highlights the unique nature of synesthetic experiences. However, what is remarkable is that through dialogue, they also found common ground, identifying shared structures and refining descriptions together. They found commonalities in the concurrent space being deep blue, silent, lonely, and transparent, even if they used different words to describe it, like deep sea or underwater. This suggests that while individual experiences are unique, there can be shared underlying patterns. Their dialogue also revealed a process they called internal mimesis. This is where one person's description could influence and subtly change the other's synesthetic experience. By hearing it describe a certain sensation, Q could try to mimic or experience that feeling internally, sometimes leading her to experience something different herself, at least temporarily. This shows how social interaction and shared language can even shape these private sensory worlds. Crucially, the study found that real-world objects and scenes weren't simply being reproduced. Instead, they served as descriptive resources to articulate an idealized synesthetic world. For example, describing the deep sea conjured darkness and depth, but not the actual pressure or heaviness. They were using familiar concepts to build something new, something that exists purely within the synesthetic experience rather than replicating reality. This idealized synesthetic world does not directly mirror the real world but draws upon it for expression. This idealized world also seemed to be a reorganization of memory. For Q, her petal and flower images were linked to a complex mix of childhood memories, perhaps a birthday at a restaurant where Claire de Lune was playing, combined with images of bougainvillea and their scent. A, on the other hand, felt her images were more shaped by accumulated impressions from media like paintings and films, rather than specific personal memories. Either way, the synesthetic experience wasn't a direct playback of a past event, but a constructive process using remembered experiences. So, what does this all mean? This study moves beyond the idea that chromaesthesia is just about associating sounds with colors. Instead, it paints a picture of chromaesthesia as a rich, multisensory, and embodied experience. The concurrents aren't just color and shape, they include movement, spatial awareness, feelings of temperature, smell, taste, and emotions all woven together. This concurrent space they described, with its own shape and sense of presence, suggests that the synesthete is not just passively observing, but actively inhabiting this sensory world. The findings strongly suggest that chromaesthesia is an embodied experience. The way colors, shapes, and movements changed with musical elements like pitch and tempo points to the body's deep role in processing music. This aligns with theories of embodied music cognition, suggesting that even for non-synesthetes, music involves a kind of covert motor imagery, a felt sense of movement and force. For synesthetes, this embodiment is simply more pronounced and consciously experienced, blending sensory, emotional, and bodily dimensions. Perhaps the most profound implication is how chromaesthesia acts as a way to embody and articulate abstract musical structures. Music isn't just a series of sounds, it has complex patterns and forms. This study proposes that synesthesia might be a way of making these abstract structures concrete and felt, transforming them into a tangible sensory-affective world. It's like the music's underlying formal architecture is being translated into a lived sensory experience. The study suggests that even non-synesthetes might have implicit sensory and bodily experiences of music, which are usually harder to access and verbalize. Now, it is important to remember this was a qualitative case study with one primary participant. While it provides incredibly rich detail, it is hard to generalize these findings to everyone with chromaesthesia. The specific piece of music, Clair de Lune, likely played a big role in eliciting these particular experiences. Also, the presence of the interviewer also having chromaesthesia certainly influenced the dialogue and the nature of the findings. This research is absolutely fascinating because it shows us that our perception can be so much richer and more interconnected than we typically assume. It challenges the idea of rigid sensory boundaries. It makes me wonder, if we all have this capacity for embodied experience with music, how much are we missing out on by not having the language or the framework to describe it? This study, by focusing on the nuanced experiences of synesthetes, opens a window into the potential richness of everyone's relationship with music. It makes me want to try and listen to music more consciously, paying attention not just to the notes and the emotions, but to any subtle sensory shifts, any hints of space or texture. Future research could definitely explore this further. It would be valuable to see if similar rich, multisensory, and embodied experiences occur with different types of music or with other synesthetic conditions. And perhaps exploring ways to help non-synesthetes access and describe their own implicit sensory experiences of music could be a really fruitful avenue. So, what do you think? Have you ever experienced colors or other sensations when listening to music? Let me know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this deep dive into the mind. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more fascinating science explained. Simply, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.